She had mud on her boots, flour on her hands, and absolutely no idea who he was. And for the first time in years, that was the only thing he could think about. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're tuned in and ready to dive into today's story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Tomorrow, I'll be bringing you another exciting story you definitely don't want to miss. So, let's get started. The black Bentley Continental moved through downtown Manhattan the way power always moves, without apology, without hesitation, parting lesser traffic like a tide that had never once considered turning back. Behind tinted glass, stretched across the rear seat with the loose, proprietorial ease of a man who had long since stopped noticing luxury because luxury had simply become the temperature of his life, sat Dominic Hargrove. 36 years old. Net worth, approximately $4.2 billion, depending on which market closed where. Founder and CEO of Hargrove Capital Group, a private equity and real estate conglomerate whose portfolio included commercial properties in 7 states, 2 tech startups currently valued at unicorn status, and a development pipeline that reshaped skylines for sport. His face had been on the cover of Forbes, Fortune, and Bloomberg Businessweek in the same calendar year. A feat his publicist described as historic and Dominic described as Tuesday. He was, by every external measure, untouchable. And he was, by every internal measure that actually counted, running on empty. "Marcus," he said, without looking up from the contract open across his lap, "walk me through again why I'm personally driving 3 hours into rural Georgia for a land deal that my acquisitions team should be handling." His chief of staff, Marcus Webb, 41, unflappable, and possessed of the particular brand of patience that can only be developed through prolonged exposure to impossible people, looked up from his own tablet. "The Callaway County parcel, sir. 1,200 acres. Prime position for the resort development. The county commissioner and the local landowners coalition won't execute without a face-to-face with the principal. They've turned down 2 of our acquisition managers already." Why? Because the last time a development company came through Callaway County, they bought the land, built nothing, let the property taxes lapse, and left 300 people without the jobs they were promised. Marcus paused. "These people have long memories, Mr. Hargrove." Dominic said nothing. He turned back to the contract, though his eyes had stopped moving across the page. "Also," Marcus added, in the careful tone of a man defusing something, "the deal is worth approximately $300 million in projected returns over 8 years. You've flown to Dubai for less. Dubai has a 4 seasons. Millhaven, Georgia has a highly rated bed and breakfast with a 4.8 on Yelp." Dominic looked up slowly. Marcus maintained eye contact with the practiced composure of a hostage negotiator. 2 days, Dominic said. "We close in 2 days, Marcus. I'm not spending a weekend in Millhaven, in a town I have to be told the name of." Marcus said nothing, which was, Dominic had long ago learned, Marcus's most effective argument. The Bentley moved south and Manhattan dissolved behind them. There had been a version of Dominic Hargrove that Millhaven would not have seemed small to. A boy from Charlotte, North Carolina. Not the wealthy part, the part where the houses had chain-link fences and the grocery store was a 20-minute bus ride, and ambition was either the best thing a kid could have or the most dangerous, depending entirely on who was watching it grow. He had been the first in his family to attend college. University of North Carolina on a partial scholarship, the rest covered by 3 part-time jobs. He worked with the grim, focused determination of someone who understood that there was no safety net beneath him. He had graduated with honors and debt and a hunger that people in his business classes, kids whose parents paid their tuition and their rent and their spring break flights, simply could not understand because hunger and comfort cannot truly occupy the same body. He had built his first company at 24, lost it at 26, rebuilt it at 28, leaner and harder and with the specific cold intelligence of a man who has touched failure and decided it will never happen again. By 30, Hargrove Capital was a name that moved money. By 33, it moved markets. Somewhere between the rebuilding and the arriving, something had calcified inside him. He couldn't name the exact moment. Maybe it was the business partner who embezzled and smiled through the whole of it. Maybe it was the woman he'd planned to marry. Brilliant, beautiful Claire Ashworth, who had left him not for another man but for the version of him she said no longer existed. You used to be curious about people, Dom. Now you're only curious about what they can do for you. She had said it quietly, without malice, which made it worse. Or maybe it was simply the accumulation of 10,000 small transactions that taught him that the world operated on leverage, and that the only way to ensure you were never the one being leveraged was to be indispensable, untouchable, always the one in the room with the most to offer and the least to lose. He had succeeded at that, spectacularly. And he sat in the back of a Bentley on a highway cutting through Georgia pine forests. And he could not remember the last time he had laughed at something that wasn't strategy. They arrived in Millhaven just after 2 in the afternoon. It was not what Dominic had been bracing for. He had expected a certain kind of southern small-town poverty, the kind that announced itself in boarded storefronts and sagging porches and the defeated look of places that history had simply stopped visiting. What he found instead was something that disarmed him before he'd even fully stepped out of the car. Millhaven, Georgia was alive. Main Street ran 4 blocks through the center of town, lined with oak trees so old their roots buckled the sidewalk. There was a hardware store with a handwritten chalkboard sign in the window advertising a chainsaw sharpening special. A diner called Loretta's with 6 pickup trucks out front at 2 in the afternoon, which meant the food was almost certainly worth the ambience. A public library with a cheerful banner strung across its facade. Summer Reading Challenge. Read a book, earn a PIE. That made Dominic stop walking for half a second. A small farmer's market set up in the town square. Maybe 20 vendors, canopies in mismatched colors. The smell of something sweet and something savory mixing in the afternoon heat. People moved differently here. Not slowly exactly. There was plenty of purpose in the way the hardware store owner was stacking bags of mulch, in the way the farmers market vendors arranged their produce. But without the particular urgent anxiety of city movement, the sense that every sidewalk was a competition and every moment not monetized was a moment wasted. Dominic stood on the sidewalk outside Loretta's and felt, for one unguarded moment, like a man who had traveled to a foreign country without a phrasebook. Meetings at 4, Marcus said, appearing at his elbow. Town hall, the coalition rep and the county commissioner. I thought you might want to. I'm going to walk, Dominic said. Marcus stared at him. I'll be at the town hall at 4. Have the term sheets ready. He left Marcus standing on the sidewalk, holding a leather portfolio and looking like a man whose internal GPS had just announced it was rerouting. Dominic walked the length of Main Street with his hands in the pockets of his dress trousers. He had, at Marcus's gentle insistence, left the jacket and tie in the car, and tried to remember the last time he had walked somewhere without a destination. He couldn't. He stopped at the farmer's market almost without deciding to. Something about the colors, maybe, or the smell. Peaches and fresh herbs and the warm, yeasty scent of baked bread that hit somewhere deep and old in him, somewhere that remembered Saturday mornings in Charlotte when his grandmother would take him to the church sale and let him pick one thing, just one, and it had always been a roll of bread that they'd eat warm on the walk home. He moved through the stalls without agenda. A man selling honey in mason jars with hand-lettered labels. A woman with an improbable collection of succulents. A teenage boy selling watermelons from the back of a truck with the entrepreneurial seriousness of a young man who had done the math. And then, at the end stall, the one nearest the big oak tree whose roots had completely surrendered the adjacent sidewalk to nature. He heard it. Laughter. Not performed laughter. Not the glittering, careful kind he heard at fundraiser dinners when someone made a joke that was mostly about their own net worth. This was the real kind. Sudden and a little unruly. The kind that happens when something catches you before you've had a chance to decide whether it's funny. He turned. She was standing behind a table covered in the most spectacular disarray of baked goods he had ever seen. Pies and cobblers and mason jars of jam and loaves of bread and something that might have been a cake or might have been an architectural experiment, and she was laughing because she had just apparently lost an entire sleeve of paper bags to a sudden gust of Georgia wind that had sent them spiraling magnificently across the town square. She was not what he would have looked twice at in Manhattan. That thought arrived in his head and immediately embarrassed him, because standing here, looking at her, he couldn't imagine what Manhattan standards had to do with anything real. She wore a pair of well-worn jeans tucked into rubber boots that were genuinely muddy, not decoratively muddy, actually muddy, the boots of a person who had been somewhere real before they got here. A yellow flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. her dark hair pulled back in a knot that had mostly escaped itself. She had flour on her forearm and a smear of what appeared to be blackberry jam on her left wrist, and she was chasing her paper bags across the square with the total, unself-conscious commitment of a person who was not the least bit concerned with how they looked doing it. She caught the last bag, held it triumphantly and turned, and found Dominic Hargrove standing 18 inches away, holding the 3 she hadn't caught yet, which the wind had deposited directly at his feet. She blinked. He held out the bags. She looked at them, then at him. A real look, the kind that took its time and wasn't trying to figure out his tax bracket, and said, "Thank you. You've got quick reflexes for someone who looks like they've never chased anything in their life." Dominic stared at her. In 4 years of Forbes covers and 2 decades of business, no one had said anything like that to him. Not even close. He started. "Do you want to buy a pie?" she asked, already turning back to her table, reorganizing with efficient, practiced hands. "I've got peach, blackberry, buttermilk chess, and sweet potato. The chess is what you want if you've never had it. People from out of town always say they'll get the peach and then they see the chess and they make the right decision." "I'm not from out of town," he said, and then immediately, inexplicably felt like an idiot because he very obviously was. She looked at him over her shoulder, and the corner of her mouth pulled up. "The Bentley parked outside Loretta's with the New York plates would like a word with you about that." He laughed. He didn't plan to. It just happened, short and real and slightly rusty sounding, like something that hadn't been used in a while. She turned fully to look at him then, and something in her expression shifted. Not softened, exactly, but opened, the way a door opens when it recognizes a knock it wasn't entirely expecting. "Buttermilk chess," he said. "I'll take it." She wrapped it in brown paper with quick, sure hands, twisted the ends, and set it on the table. $7. He reached for his wallet and realized with a start that he never carried cash. Ever. He had not carried cash since approximately 2019. He had cards and apps and an assistant who handled the physical currency of daily life, and he was standing in a farmer's market in Millhaven, Georgia, holding a paper-wrapped pie, with nothing but a black Amex that this woman almost certainly could not run through a reader at her folding table. The expression on his face must have said all of this, because she watched it happen and laughed again. That real, unguarded laugh, and said, "You can pay me back later. You're not going anywhere." She tilted her head, studying him with an openness that felt almost unsettling. "You're here for the land meeting, aren't you? The developer from New York." He paused. "How did you know?" "Because Millhaven has 400 people, and you are the most out-of-place human being I have seen since the film crew that got lost here 2 summers ago looking for Savannah." She extended her flour-dusted hand. "Ellie Calloway. And before you do the math, yes, that Calloway. My family's land is part of what you're here to buy." The name hit him with the quiet force of something significant. He shook her hand. Her grip was firm, her hand warm, her eyes direct and entirely unimpressed. "Dominic Hargrove," he said. "I know," she said simply, and went back to straightening her table. He stood there with his paper-wrapped pie and the distinct, disorienting sensation of being the least important person in his own story. If you enjoy stories that remind you that the most unexpected people can change everything, drop a comment below and tell us what you think so far. Her name was Eleanor Grace Calloway, though no one in Millhaven had called her Eleanor since her 3rd-grade teacher, and even she had eventually given up. She was 29 years old, a licensed veterinarian, as Dominic would discover later, not what he had assumed, not what the jeans and boots and market stall would have suggested to someone operating on assumptions, which he realized with a crawling discomfort he had been. She ran a mixed animal practice out of a converted barn on the edge of her family's property, drove a truck with 140,000 miles on it and a cracked rear bumper, baked on weekends because she found it meditative, and sold at the farmer's market because her grandmother had done it and her mother had done it, and some things you do because they connect you to a line of people who knew something about living that spreadsheets don't capture. She had left Millhaven once, 4 years at the University of Georgia for her undergraduate degree, then the University of Florida for veterinary school. She had graduated near the top of her class. She had received offers from practices in Atlanta, in Nashville, in Dallas. Good offers. City offers. She had come home. Not because she couldn't leave. Not because she was afraid of the city or limited by circumstance. She had come home the way someone returns to the place where they breathe correctly, deliberately, with full knowledge of what they were choosing and what they were releasing, and at peace with the mathematics of that choice. Millhaven was not the whole world. She knew that. It was her world, which was a different and, she had always thought, more important thing. She had watched the letters from Hargrove Capital arrive at the county commissioner's office over the past 3 months. Increasingly generous offers for the land coalition acreage, each one a little more precisely targeted to the number that might finally break a tired farmer's resolve. She had sat in 2 community meetings where she'd listened to neighbors weigh their fear of losing their land against their fear of losing their livelihoods. And she had said clearly and without drama, "We don't have to be afraid of them. We just have to be smart." And now the man behind the letters was standing at her market stall with a $7 pie and no cash, and he looked, beneath the obvious wealth and the just as obvious guardedness, like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to simply be somewhere without an agenda. She recognized that look. She had worn it herself, during veterinary school, during the 3rd year when the workload had been crushing, and she'd called her mother at midnight and said, "I've forgotten what I like." Her mother had said, without missing a beat, "Then come home for the weekend and remember." She had. It had worked. She wondered, watching Dominic Hargrove carry his pie toward the town square bench and sit with the careful deliberateness of someone giving themselves permission to stop moving for 5 minutes. She wondered if anyone had ever told him to come home. She wondered if he had one. Then she sold a jar of blackberry jam to Mrs. Patterson from the church, and she stopped wondering and went back to work, because wondering about complicated men was not on the agenda, and she had $40 left to make before she could justify packing up early. But she noticed, as she wrapped Mrs. Patterson's jam and made change and answered a question about the sugar content in the peach preserves, that she was smiling. Not because of anything in particular, just smiling. The 4 o'clock meeting at the town hall was everything Dominic had expected and nothing he was fully prepared for. The county commissioner, a weathered, direct man named Robert Gaines, shook hands with the grip of someone who had been doing serious physical labor since before Dominic could tie his own shoes, and looked at him with eyes that had seen a lot of development promises come and go with the seasons. The coalition representatives, 6 landowners ranging from a 60-year-old peach farmer to a 40-year-old woman running a small organic operation, sat across the table with the collective quiet dignity of people who did not need to perform their seriousness because their seriousness was simply a fact about them. And at the far end of the table, with a notepad and a pen and the same direct, unhurried gaze she turned on him at the market stall, sat Ellie Calloway. "You're part of the coalition?" Dominic said before he could stop himself. She looked at him mildly. "I represent the Calloway family interest. About 300 acres of the parcel. A beat. Is that a problem?" It was not a challenge, exactly. But it was not nothing, either. "Not at all," he said and sat down. Marcus spread the term sheets. Dominic presented, clearly, thoroughly, with the professional fluency of a man who had closed 1,000 rooms. The resort development would bring construction jobs, then 200 permanent positions, infrastructure improvements, a guaranteed community benefit fund worth $2 million annually. Commissioner Gaines asked hard questions. The organic farmer asked harder ones. The peach farmer, a man named Dale Hutchins whose family had worked the same land for 4 generations, asked the hardest one of all, "What happens to us if the resort fails?" "There are contractual protections," Dominic said. "The land reverts." "I've heard contractual protections," Dale Hutchins said, not unkindly. "I'd like to hear what you think happens to us." The room was quiet. Dominic looked at the man across from him, the deep lines of his face, the working man's hands, the way he sat in his chair like he had grown there, rooted like the peach trees his grandfather had planted, and said something he had not planned to say, something that arrived from a place beneath the presentation. "I think if this fails," Dominic said quietly, "you're the ones who bear the cost, and I think that's a legitimate reason to be in this room asking me hard questions." He paused. "So ask them. All of them. I'm not leaving until they're answered." Marcus looked at him. Ellie Calloway looked at him. The room looked at him. Something shifted almost audibly in the temperature of the table. The meeting ran until 6:30. No papers were signed. But Commissioner Gaines, shaking Dominic's hand at the door, said, "Come back tomorrow." We'll finish this. It was the first time in years that come back tomorrow had sounded like an opportunity rather than a delay. Outside, in the long gold light of a Georgia evening, Dominic stood on the town hall steps and breathed. Ellie Calloway came through the door behind him, tucking her notepad into a canvas bag, and stopped when she found him there. "You didn't answer Dale's question," she said. "Not accusatory, simply stating a fact." "I answered it honestly. You acknowledged the risk. That's not the same as answering." She came to stand beside him, looking out at the square, where the market vendors were packing up and the oak trees were going amber in the last of the light. "What would you do if it failed?" He was quiet for a moment. "I've never let something I built fail," he said. She looked at him sidelong. "That's not an answer either." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She nodded once, as though she had received and filed away some piece of information, and started down the steps. "Ellie," he said. She paused. "The pie." He reached into his jacket pocket and produced a folded 20, which Marcus had procured from somewhere. "And the change is for the inconvenience of the wind." She looked at the 20, then at him. Then she took it, folded it once, and tucked it in her bag. "The chess pie's better warm," she said. "In case you were wondering." She walked off across the square, canvas bag on her shoulder, muddy boots on the brick sidewalk, and did not look back. Dominic stood on the steps for a long moment in the Georgia evening, holding absolutely nothing, feeling, against all reason, against every carefully constructed wall, like something had just quietly, irrevocably begun. The bed and breakfast Marcus had booked was called the Magnolia Inn, run by a woman named Carol Tinsdale who had apparently decided that hosting guests was indistinguishable from adopting them. Dominic discovered this at 7 in the morning when he came downstairs to find a full Southern breakfast laid on the dining table. Eggs, biscuits, sausage gravy, sliced tomatoes from what Carol described as my own garden, not the store. There's a difference, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And Carol herself seated across from the only other guest, refilling coffee and conducting what appeared to be a thorough and cheerful interrogation. The other guest was Ellie Calloway. She looked up when Dominic appeared in the doorway. She was wearing a different flannel today, green, sleeves already rolled, and her hair was down, which he hadn't seen yesterday, dark and slightly wavy and making her look younger and somehow even more unguarded than she had at the market stall. "Your timing is good," Carol announced, waving him toward a chair with the authority of a woman who had never once considered that an invitation might be declined. "Sit. Eat." "Ellie was just telling me about the meeting." Dominic sat. He looked at Ellie. She looked back at him with the mild, unconcerned expression of someone who has absolutely nothing to apologize for. "You're staying here?" he said. "My truck broke down last night," she said. "Alternator. Dale's son is fixing it this morning." She lifted her coffee cup. "Millhaven is a small town, Mr. Hargrove. We tend to end up in the same places." "Dominic," he said, without entirely deciding to. She considered this for a moment, actually considered it the way she seemed to consider most things without rushing toward a conclusion. "Dominic," she said, and went back to her eggs. Carol beamed at both of them with the undisguised satisfaction of a woman who had just successfully arranged something. It was Carol who suggested, with the breezy, irresistible confidence of someone who had never been told no and didn't intend to start, that since Ellie needed to check on a patient out near the East Field before Dale's son returned the truck, and since Dominic had 2 hours before his follow-up call with Marcus, he might as well ride along. "Fresh air," Carol said. "Good for the soul. Also, the biscuits will keep." This was how Dominic Hargrove, for Billionaire CEO, found himself in the passenger seat of a borrowed Ford pickup that smelled like pine needles and old dog, driving down a dirt road outside Millhaven, Georgia at 8 in the morning. Ellie drove with one hand on the wheel and the easy comfort of someone who had driven this road 10,000 times. The Georgia morning was extraordinary. Low mist still sitting in the valleys between the fields, the light coming in gold and clean through the pines, birdsong that was genuinely, almost offensively loud compared to anything Manhattan had ever offered him. "What's the patient?" he asked. "A horse. Old quarter horse named Biscuit. Earl Maddox's property." She glanced at him. "You've never been in a truck like this, have you?" He looked around at the cracked dashboard, the manual windows, the faded street Christopher metal hanging from the rearview mirror. Not recently. It runs, she said, in a tone that treated this as a complete and sufficient defense of the vehicle. He almost smiled. What's wrong with the horse? Mild colic. I treated him 2 days ago. Just want to check his gut sounds before I clear him. She paused. Do you know what colic is? In a horse? Stomach pain. She looked mildly impressed. Essentially, yes. It can be minor or it can be life-threatening. And the difference isn't always obvious from the outside. A beat. A lot of things are like that. He looked at her. She was watching the road. Earl Maddox was 73, bow-legged, and greeted Ellie with the warm relief of a man whose worry had been quietly keeping him up at night. He ate this morning, Earl said. Good sign. Very good sign, Ellie confirmed, already moving into the barn with the focused ease of someone at home in their work. Dominic followed without being invited or uninvited, which seemed to be the operating principle of this morning. Biscuit was a big chestnut gelding with a white blaze down his nose and the world-weary eyes of an animal who had seen many things and found most of them unsurprising. He accepted Ellie's examination, stethoscope to his flank, hands moving with practiced, quiet confidence along his belly, with a sigh of profound equine tolerance. Dominic stood at the stall door and watched her work. This was the thing that got him, he would realize later. Not her face, not the flannel shirt, not even the laughter at the market stall. It was this, the way she was completely present inside her competence. No performance, no awareness of being watched. Just a woman who knew what she was doing and did it with her whole attention, and in doing so created a quality of stillness around herself that Dominic hadn't experienced in a room. Any room, in longer than he could honestly say. He's good, she said, straightening. She stroked Biscuit's nose once, unhurried. All clear, Earl. Keep him on the small paddock through the weekend. Easy feed. Earl exhaled. A long, slow release of 3 days of quiet worry, and said, What do I owe you, Ellie? Nothing. This is the follow-up. Ellie. Earl. Her voice was gentle and final in equal measure. Nothing. The old man nodded, pressing his mouth together in the way of people managing emotion they consider private. He turned to Dominic, studying him. You're the developer, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, sir. Earl looked at him for a long moment with eyes that had the unnerving clarity of the very old. You treat this land right, he said. You treat these people right. He paused. This place has a soul. Not every place does. You find ones that do. You handle them careful. He walked back toward the house without waiting for a response. Dominic stood in the barn doorway and felt those words settle somewhere they intended to stay. Beside him, Ellie was packing her bag. She straightened, and for a moment they were standing close, closer than they'd been before, and the barn was quiet except for Biscuit's slow breathing and the birdsong coming through the open door and the particular specific silence of two people becoming aware of each other in a way that neither of them had entirely budgeted for. He's right, you know, she said quietly. Not confrontational. Not a speech. Just the plain truth, offered without decoration. This place has a soul. She looked at him then, directly, fully, the way she did everything, and something in her expression said, clearly and without words, and I need to know if you can feel that, because if you can't, none of the contracts matter. He held her gaze. I know, he said, and for the first time since he'd arrived in Millhaven, Dominic Hargrove was not thinking about the deal. The follow-up meeting at the town hall that afternoon went well. Technically, Dominic was sharp, prepared, and generous in ways that surprised the coalition. He agreed to a community oversight board with real authority. He agreed to a local hiring mandate, 60% of construction jobs guaranteed to Callaway County residents. He agreed to a land reversion clause that Dale Hutchins's lawyer spent 40 minutes reviewing and ultimately could not find fault with. Commissioner Gaines said, We're close, which, in the language of cautious men, meant very close indeed. Marcus pulled Dominic aside in the hallway afterward and said, in the low, carefully neutral tone he reserved for observations he wasn't sure would be welcome, This is the most favorable terms we've offered on any acquisition in 3 years. Is that a problem? Dominic asked. Marcus studied him for a moment. No, he said slowly. Just an observation. Dominic straightened his cuffs and went back into the room. What nobody had planned, least of all Dominic, was that the signing would be delayed another day. Dale Hutchins's attorney needed 24 hours to prepare an amendment to the reversion clause. Routine, everyone agreed. Unavoidable. Commissioner Gaines apologized. Dominic said it was no problem with a smoothness that surprised him, because it genuinely wasn't. That surprised him more. Marcus booked another night at the Magnolia Inn. Carol Tinsdale received this news with a satisfaction so complete it was almost architectural. It was Ellie who found him that evening. He was sitting on the inn's back porch, a wide, screened structure overlooking Carol's garden, with his laptop open and his fourth unanswered email to his New York office glowing in the Georgia dusk. He had been staring at it for 20 minutes without typing a single word, which was not something Dominic Hargrove did. Dominic Hargrove did not stare. He decided. He acted. He moved forward. He was staring. Ellie came through the screen door with 2 mugs of coffee, Carol's doing, presumably, since Carol seemed to operate as a benevolent stage director, and set one beside him without asking if he wanted it. She sat in the other chair, looked out at the garden, said nothing. He appreciated that more than he knew how to say. After a while he closed the laptop. You didn't go home, he said. Truck still isn't ready. She wrapped both hands around her mug. Dale Jr. found a second issue once he got into it. Apparently my alternator had been masking a deeper problem for a while. She paused, something wry and self-aware in her voice. Story of most things, really? He looked at her sideways. You do that a lot. Do what? Say something about a car and mean something else entirely. She smiled into her coffee. A small, private smile that she didn't seem to be performing for anyone. Small-town veterinarian habit. You spend enough time telling farmers that their animals' obvious symptoms are covering a systemic issue. You start seeing the pattern everywhere. The garden was going blue in the dusk. Fireflies were beginning, tentatively at first, then with more confidence, to appear between Carol's rose bushes, small cold lights floating in the warm dark. Dominic had not seen fireflies in years. Can I ask you something? He said. You can ask. Why did you come back here? After vet school, you had other options. She was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone formulating a careful answer. The quiet of someone deciding how honest to be with a person they're still calibrating. My mother got sick my last year of vet school, she said. Breast cancer. She's fine now, fully clear, for years out. But that year was... She paused. That year rearranged my priorities in a way that nothing else could have. I came home to help, and somewhere in those months of being here, I remembered what I'd been rushing away from. What had you been rushing away from? She looked at him. The feeling that here wasn't enough. That I needed somewhere bigger to matter. She shook her head. That was the lie I'd been telling myself. The lie a lot of people tell themselves. The words landed in the specific interior place that true things always land. What changed your mind? He asked, his voice quieter than he'd intended. Earl Maddox's dog, she said, and laughed at his expression. I'm serious. I treated his old lab, Henry, 17 years old, which is ancient for a lab, the week before I was supposed to fly to Atlanta for my first interview. Henry had arthritis so bad he could barely get up. Earl carried him into my clinic. A 70-year-old man carrying his dog like a child. She paused. Earl looked at me and said, I don't know what I'd do without you, Ellie. And I realized that was it. That was the whole thing. To be someone that people don't know what they do without. She turned her mug in her hands. You can't build that in a city where no one knows your name. Dominic was very still. She looked at him again, that direct, searching look. What about you? What about me? Why are you really here? And I don't mean the land. The question arrived gently, but it arrived with weight. He felt it press against something interior and defended, something that had a wall around it he'd spent years reinforcing. I don't know, he said. which was the most honest answer he had given anyone in a very long time. She nodded slowly, as though this answer, incomplete as it was, told her something important. They sat in Carol's garden in the Georgia dark, fireflies moving between the roses, coffee growing cool in their hands, the specific charged silence of two people standing at the edge of something they haven't named yet. Both aware of it, neither moving away. "Your pie," he said finally. "It was the best thing I've eaten in years." She laughed. That real sudden laugh. "That is either a very sweet compliment," she said, "or the saddest thing I've heard all week." "Probably both," he admitted. And they sat there a little longer in the warm dark, not moving, not naming it. Both of them, for different reasons and the same reason, needing this particular moment to last just a little while longer before the world remembered to complicate it. If this story is pulling at your heart the way we think it is, drop a comment below and let us know. Are you rooting for Dominic and Ellie? Tell us what you think is going to happen next. We read every single one. The morning of the signing arrived with the particular clarity that follows a night of insufficient sleep. Dominic had lain awake in the Magnolia Inn's narrow guest bed until well past midnight, staring at the ceiling with the unsettling alertness of a man whose mind had decided that rest was a problem for someone else. He had run numbers in his head, not deal numbers which would have been comfortable and familiar, but a different kind of accounting altogether. The kind where the columns don't balance neatly and the bottom line keeps changing depending on what you decide to count. He was downstairs at 6:30. Carol, who appeared to operate on a schedule that began somewhere around 4 in the morning, had coffee ready and the quiet wisdom not to fill the silence with conversation. He sat at the kitchen table with his mug and his thoughts and the early Georgia light coming pale and clean through the window, and he made a phone call he had not planned to make. It rang 4 times before she picked up. "It's 6:30 in the morning, Dominic." Claire Ashworth's voice was sleep-rough but not unkind. They had arrived, over 3 years of careful distance, at the particular equilibrium of people who had loved each other and survived it. Not close, not estranged, but honest in the way that only ex-partners who have genuinely processed something can be honest. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." A pause. The sound of her sitting up. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." He turned his mug in his hands. I needed to ask you something." "At 6:30. "Yes." Another pause. "Okay," she said, and her voice had shifted into the register he remembered. The one that meant she was fully present, fully listening, all the careful defenses set aside. "Ask. You said, when you left, you said I used to be curious about people." He stopped. "Was that true? Was I actually that person once?" The silence on the other end was long enough that he almost regretted calling. "Yes," she said softly. You were the most curious person I'd ever met. You wanted to know everyone's story. You remembered details about people that they'd forgotten they'd told you." A pause. "It was one of the first things I loved about you." He closed his eyes. "What happened to Georgia, Dom?" she asked. "The signing." "Yeah. And?" He was quiet. "Oh," Claire said, with the gentle perceptiveness of someone connecting dots. "There's someone there." "It's not. I'm not asking you to explain it," she said. I'm glad, Dominic. I mean that. A beat. Don't let the walls win this time." "Okay. They're very good walls. But they're still just walls." He sat with that for a moment. "Go close your deal," she said. "And then figure out the other thing." He thanked her. He meant it. The town hall at 10 o'clock was full in a way that the previous meetings hadn't been. Word had moved through Millhaven the way word moves through small towns. Organically, thoroughly, and with considerable editorial embellishment. And a number of residents had arrived to witness the signing. They lined the back wall and filled the extra chairs with the quiet collective gravity of people who understood that what happened in this room today would shape the place where they lived and their children would live. Dominic felt their presence differently than he usually felt a room. Usually a room full of people was an audience. Today it felt like something closer to a responsibility. The documents were spread across the table. Commissioner Gaines had his pen. Dale Hutchins sat straight-backed and still, the way a man sits when he has made his peace with a decision and is ready to execute it with dignity. The other coalition members were present, composed, watchful. Ellie sat at the end of the table. She had not spoken to him that morning beyond a brief, neutral good morning in the hallway, the careful, measured greeting of someone who had spent the previous evening on a porch saying true things and was now, in the sober light of the morning, recalibrating. He understood it. He felt it himself. Commissioner Gaines looked around the table. "I think we're ready." The room settled, and then Dominic's phone rang. He would have ignored it, should have ignored it, would have, under any previous version of circumstances, except that the name on the screen was Richard Hargrove, his father, who had not called him spontaneously in 4 years. He excused himself with a quiet word, stepped into the hallway. "Dad, I heard you're in Georgia." His father's voice was the same as always, dry, economical, carrying warmth in the same hidden way a stone carries heat long after the sun has gone. "Marcus told me something about a land deal. We're signing in about 5 minutes." "Good." A pause, which in Richard Hargrove's conversational language meant something was coming that he had rehearsed and was still finding difficult. "I also heard from your Aunt Patricia, who heard from someone in your office, that you've been there 3 days instead of 1. The attorney needed time." The sound of a man who was not entirely convinced. "Dominic." His father's voice changed, dropped half a register, lost its efficient dryness, became something older and more tentative. "I've been thinking about what I said to you when you made your first billion." Dominic went very still. "I told you not to let anyone take it," Richard said. "I've been thinking. It's the worst advice I ever gave you. I was scared for you. I'd been scared my whole life, and I put it on you, and you—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "You built the walls I taught you to build. And I watched you disappear behind them, and I didn't say anything, and I should have." The hallway was very quiet. "Dad, I'm not asking you to forgive me on the phone," Richard said quickly. Whatever's keeping you in that town 3 days, son. Don't be smart about it. Don't manage it." A pause, long and weighted. "Just be there for it." Dominic stood in the hallway of a small-town Georgia civic building with his father's voice in his ear and $4 billion in his portfolio and the sudden, vertiginous clarity of a man who has just watched 2 different kinds of accounting reconcile. He walked back into the room. Everyone looked at him. The pen was ready. The documents were waiting. He looked at Ellie. She looked back. Carefully, neutrally, her expression giving him nothing and asking nothing, which somehow made the thing he needed to say more urgent rather than less. "Before we sign," he said, and his voice came out steadier than he felt, "I want to amend the community benefit structure." Marcus looked up sharply. "I want to increase the annual community fund to $3 million. And I want the clinic." He looked at Commissioner Gaines. "The county clinic on Route 9 that's been operating on a shoestring since 2019. I want full facility renovation included in the development budget. Non-negotiable. Not a promise, a contract clause." The room was silent. Dale Hutchins looked at him for a long moment. Then the old farmer set his hands flat on the table and said, "Son, you just bought yourself some Georgia land." The room exhaled. Documents were signed. Hands were shaken. Carol Tinsdale, who had somehow appeared in the back of the room with a tray of biscuits, because of course she had, began distributing food with the efficiency of a woman who had anticipated exactly this outcome. In the movement and noise of it, Dominic found himself beside Ellie. She was looking at the signed documents on the table, her expression unreadable. "The clinic," she said quietly. "You didn't mention that before." "I know. That clinic serves 4 counties. There are people who drive 40 minutes each way because it's the closest care they can access." She paused. "How did you know it needed help?" "Earl Maddox mentioned it," he said. "In passing yesterday morning. I looked it up last night." She turned to look at him fully. Something moved through her expression. Something that wasn't the careful, measured look she'd been giving him all morning. Something that was older and less defended. "Dominic," she said. "Ellie," he said. And then, because the room was full of people and this was not the moment, and because some things are better said in the honest quiet of a screened porch than in the noise of a room full of witnesses, he said only, "Have dinner with me tonight. Not strategy. Not the deal. Just dinner." She looked at him for a long moment. Carol's making pot roast, she said. I already know because she told me at breakfast. Then we'll eat Carol's pot roast, he said. The corner of her mouth moved. Okay, she said. One word, quietly delivered, carrying, for both of them, the weight of everything that was finally carefully beginning. We are so close to the ending, and we promise you, it is worth every word. Drop a comment right now and tell us. Did Dominic's phone call with his father break your heart a little? Because it broke ours writing it. Let us know you're still here. Carol's pot roast was, without question, the best thing Dominic had eaten in his adult life. He said this out loud, which made Carol press her hand to her chest with the satisfied expression of a woman receiving her rightful due, and made Ellie laugh into her water glass and made Marcus, who had been invited because Carol did not believe in exclusion and had set 5 places without being asked, look up from his plate with the expression of a man quietly revising several long-held assumptions about what a good evening could look like. They ate at Carol's long dining table with the windows open and the Georgia night coming in warm and cricket loud and unhurried. Carol told a story about the time a black bear got into her garden and she chased it off with a broom, which Dominic was certain was embellished and which Ellie confirmed was entirely true and had in fact been worse than described. Dale Hutchins had called Ellie during the meal, not about the deal, just to say thank you, which was a different kind of call entirely, and she had stepped outside briefly and come back in with something soft around her eyes that she didn't explain and didn't need to. It was the most ordinary evening Dominic had spent in years. He could not remember the last time ordinary had felt like this, like something to be held carefully, like something rare. After dinner, Ellie walked out to the back porch again. The same chairs, the same garden, the fireflies returning with the reliable faithfulness of things that don't need to be asked twice. Dominic followed. They sat in the familiar quiet for a while, the dinner sounds drifting through the screen door behind them, Carol and Marcus discovering, improbably, a shared enthusiasm for old westerns, their conversation drifting into comfortable territory neither of them had expected. You're leaving tomorrow, Ellie said. It wasn't a question. Yes. He paused. Marcus has me on an 8 o'clock out of Savannah. She nodded, turned her mug in her hands. Carol had produced decaf, presciently, without being asked. Back to the world. Back to the world, he agreed. The fireflies moved between the roses. Somewhere in the dark beyond the garden. Something, an owl maybe, called once and went quiet. I owe you an honest answer, he said. She looked at him. You asked me why I was really here, that night on this porch. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, looking at his hands. The truth is I've been running a very long time, since I was 22 years old with nothing and everything to prove. And somewhere between the proving and the arriving I forgot. He stopped, found the words again. I forgot what it felt like to want something that wasn't a transaction. The garden was very quiet. And then I chased some paper bags across the town square, he said. And a woman with flour on her arm told me I looked like someone who'd never chased anything in his life, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. Ellie was very still beside him. I'm not good at this, he said. I want to be honest about that. I've spent 15 years being excellent at things that have nothing to do with being good at this. I've got walls, Ellie. Real ones. Built carefully over a long time, for reasons that made sense once. He turned to look at her. But I don't want to be behind them anymore. I don't know exactly what that looks like. But I know it started here. It started with you. She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she said, quietly, I'm not a project, Dominic. No, he said immediately. You're not. That's not. Let me finish. Her voice was gentle but clear, the voice she used with Earl's horse, firm and kind in equal measure. I'm not a project, and I'm not a lesson, and I'm not the thing that teaches the city man how to feel again. Pause. I've got my own life here, my practice, my patience, my family's land, this community. I'm not waiting to be someone's turning point. I know that, he said. Do you? Yes. He held her gaze. You're not my turning point, Ellie. You're the first person in years who made me want to be better for my own reasons. Not to close a deal. Not to win something. He paused. Just because being around you makes being a better person feel possible. And I haven't felt that in a very long time. The silence that followed was different from the silences before. Warmer. Less suspended. Ellie set her mug down on the porch rail and looked out at the garden for a long moment. When she turned back, her expression had changed. The careful measurement was gone, and what was underneath it was something quieter and more vulnerable and entirely real. I told myself, she said slowly, that you were going to be exactly what I expected. Entitled. Extractive. In and out. A small pause. I told myself that very firmly on the drive to the town hall that first day. Reasonable assumption, he said. It was, she agreed. And then you held out 3 paper bags and looked completely lost. And I thought, oh no. He laughed. That real, slightly rusty laugh. She smiled. Full and unguarded. The smile she hadn't been giving him since the morning. The one that came from somewhere undefended. I live in Millhaven, Dominic, she said. That's not changing. My practice is here. My mother is here. My life is here. I know. New York is a place I have an office, he said. It's not. I've never once thought of it as home. She studied him. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to come back, he said simply. Not for the land. Not for Hargrove Capital. He paused. For pot roast and farmers markets and a woman who charges $7 for the best pie I've ever had and doesn't know my net worth and genuinely does not care. Ellie looked at him for a long, honest moment. The chess pie, she said carefully, is $8 now. I raised my prices in March. He stared at her. She held it for exactly 3 seconds before she laughed. The real one, the sudden one, the one that had no audience and no intention. And he laughed with her, and it was the easiest thing, the most natural thing, the thing that felt most like something beginning rather than ending. He did leave the next morning. 8 o'clock out of Savannah, as scheduled. Marcus was quietly, professionally triumphant about the signed deal. The New York office sent 17 congratulatory emails before they hit cruising altitude. The financial press would pick up the story by afternoon. Hargrove Capital closes major Georgia resort development. Most community-forward terms in company history. Dominic read none of it. He was looking out the airplane window at Georgia going small beneath him, the pine forests and the red earth and the rivers catching morning light, and he was thinking about a screened porch and fireflies and the specific quality of silence that existed between two people who had decided, without quite saying so, to trust each other. He called his father from 30,000 feet. Richard Hargrove picked up on the second ring, which meant he had been waiting. I heard the signing went well, his father said. It did. Pause. Dad, I'd like to come to Charlotte next month. If you want that. The silence on the other end was brief and full. I want that, Richard said. Simply, without qualification. I very much want that. They talked for 40 minutes. Longer than they had talked in years, about nothing important and everything that mattered. About Charlotte and the old neighborhood and a fishing trip they'd taken when Dominic was 9 that neither of them had mentioned in decades. When they hung up, Dominic sat back in his seat and felt something shift in his chest. Some long-held tension releasing, like a rope that had been wound too tight finally being allowed to uncoil. Walls, his father had said. Don't let the walls win. He took out his phone. Opened a new message. The chess pie is legitimately worth more than $8, he typed. I've been thinking about it since Savannah. That's probably not normal. He stared at it. Hit send before he could think better of it. The reply came 11 minutes later. He was not counting, he was absolutely counting, and it said, It's completely normal. It's a very good pie. Also Earl called this morning. Biscuit is trotting in the paddock. Thought you'd want to know. He read it twice. Then he typed, I'm coming back in 2 weeks. If that's okay. Her reply this time was faster. Carol already has your room held. I think she knew before either of us did. He smiled at his phone at 30,000 feet like a man who had just remembered something essential about himself. Something that had been buried under years of ambition and guardedness and the particular loneliness of people who are very successful and very alone. He was curious again. About people. About a town with oak trees that buckled the sidewalk. About a woman with muddy boots and flour on her arm who charged $8 for the best pie in Georgia and looked at him like he was someone worth the honest truth. He came back in 2 weeks. And the 2 weeks after that. By October, he had quietly relocated his primary office operations to Atlanta. Close enough to New York to manage the empire, close enough to Millhaven to drive down on a Friday evening and arrive in time for the farmer's market Saturday morning. By November, he was at the market every Saturday, running the card reader that Ellie had finally, under his gentle insistence, acquired, handing out brown paper bags, learning, slowly, willingly, with the genuine curiosity of a man rediscovering a part of himself he'd thought was gone. The names and stories of everyone who stopped at the stall. By December, on a cold Georgia evening with the town square strung in Christmas lights and carols wassail warm in their hands, Dominic told Ellie he loved her. He said it simply, without strategy, without calculation, the way you say something that has been true for a while and has finally run out of reasons to stay quiet. She looked at him in the Christmas lights. "I know," she said softly. "That's not," he started. "I love you too," she said. "I just wanted to let you finish." He laughed. She laughed. Carol, who was 11 feet away and absolutely within earshot and made no effort whatsoever to pretend otherwise, said finally loud enough to be heard across the square. Dale Hutchins, walking past with his wife, shook Dominic's hand and said, "You did good, son." And Dominic Hargrove, billionaire, builder of empires, lifelong collector of walls, stood in the Christmas lights of Millhaven, Georgia, holding the hand of a woman who had never once been impressed by his net worth, and felt, for the first time in as long as he could honestly remember, like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not at the top. Not untouchable. Just here. Rooted. Present. Home. And just like that, the most arrogant man in any room learned that the most powerful thing he could ever build had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with the courage to let someone in. If the story moved you, if Dominic and Ellie made you feel something real, drop a comment below right now. Tell us your favorite moment. Tell us what made you smile or what hit you in the chest. We built this story for you, and we'd love to hear from you. Every single comment means the world to us. Thank you so much for watching my story all the way to the end. Your support means everything. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts.